we know that when he appears, we shall be like God. For we shall have seen him in many ways. We are gathered here this day to give thanks to God and to witness to our faith as it has been seen in the life of God. We come together in our grief. He left us too soon, that in our pain we may find comfort, in our sorrow we may find hope, and in death we may find life. Let us pray.
Will you stand and pray with me? O God, who gave us birth, you are ever more ready to hear than we are to pray. You know our needs before we ask, and our ignorance in asking. Give to us now your grace, that as we shrink before the mystery of death, we may see the light of eternity. Speak to us once more your solemn message of life and of death. Help us to live as those who are prepared to die. And when our days here are accomplished, enable us to die as those who go forth to live, so that living or dying, our life may be in you, and that nothing in life or death will be able to separate us from your great love. Amen. Please remain standing for our hymn.
join me as we read responsively the 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. In the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. For thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Would you join together as we sing hymn number 433? Would you please stand?
Hello, my name is Jane Yang, and I had the honor of working for Mark from 2006 until his retirement in 2015, and the great privilege of calling him first my boss and my mentor, and ultimately my friend. When I think back upon who Mark was, I remember the first time I met him. I was a relatively new professional, and I had reached out to local counseling center directors, and Mark offered to meet me for coffee. I was trying to figure out who I was and what that meant for my next career steps. And at the end of that meeting, Mark looked at me and he said, "There's a place for you at Emory." Mark had such a gift for creating place and a sense of belonging for others. He believed deeply in the importance of relationships and community. And he also believed in the importance of empowerment and advocacy, which I came to learn over time were values instilled in him by his own parents. These beliefs were reflected in his development of a training program to create the next generation of mental health professionals and in his development of a formal outreach program to build relationships with community members and to empower them, as well as to increase mental health access beyond the walls of therapy rooms. He asked me to build and oversee the area of outreach. As part of his passion for outreach, Mark helped bring a chapter of Active Minds to Emory. Active Minds is a student group that's focused on reducing stigma related to mental health issues and increasing education about mental health. Mark was extremely excited and passionate about the work this group was doing. And I remember a time when the group came to me and they said, "We want to host all these programs, but we have no money." And I went to Mark and he said, "Don't worry about it, I'll figure it out." A week later, he came back to me and he said, "It's all figured out, all the programs they want to host are funded." Little did I know at the time that they were all funded through the generous donation of Dr. Mark McLeod. But that was Mark. He really, truly believed in supporting other people's potential, and he was willing to give of himself to do so. In addition to creating a sense of belonging, empowering others, and advocacy, Mark held a deep love for his family, and his love for his family showed up in how he supported me and other staff members. Mark was there for me through some of the most important milestones in my life, including the time of my life when I got engaged and married. And about a month before my wedding, Mark was checking in with me about how things were going, and he was sort of doing that happy Mark check-in, assuming everything was fine. And I completely broke down in his office, which he did not expect, but in true Mark fashion, he really took in stride. And I remember he shared with me 2 great pieces of wisdom that day. First, he shared an amazingly straightforward and effective way to better involve my fiance in the wedding planning process. And second, he shared with me a story from his own wedding to Amy. And what he shared about was how chaotic their wedding was and all the stuff that had been happening for him, but this really important moment with her, and it was towards the end of the day, and he said they were sitting in these rocking chairs on the front porch of the venue of their wedding. And he said all he remembered was looking up at her across that porch and feeling just utter and complete happiness, contentment, and love. And he told me that he hoped that my future husband and I would create the space to have at least one, if not more, of those moments where we really connected with what mattered. As we're here today honoring Mark, I hope that we each can connect with what mattered most to us in our respective relationships with him. Whether that's the way he created a sense of belonging for us, the way he empowered us, or the way he shared his tremendous and great love and regard for his family, his friends, and others. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Jeff Quinn from Vienna, Virginia, and I'm blessed to be joined by my wife, Colleen, today, who's known Mark almost as long as I have, and 2 other 50-year friends from Tulane are here, Brian and Mary Beth Corrigan. It's my distinct honor and high privilege to spend a few minutes speaking about one of the kindest, smartest, caring, down-to-earth, loyal, faith-filled, gentle, selfless, and humble human beings I've ever met. Have I left anything out? Probably. I met Mark back in 1972. So we're going to turn the clock back a little bit from what Jane had to say. When we were both freshmen at Tulane University in New Orleans, Louisiana. Little did I know that I'd be reflecting and celebrating our friendship and a life well lived over 50 years later. There are friends, and then there are friends. I suspect that you, like me, have a special group of friends, ones that you might consider to be counted on one hand. I consider these friends to be what I call eternal friends. For me, Mark was in that group. These are special friendships when a person enters my life and then never leaves. That is an eternal friendship. Mark is one of my eternal friends. Maybe he was one of your eternal friends too. I got to know his parents, his siblings, his wife, and his cherubs. Mark made me laugh, and Mark helped me to believe that there are good people and good things in the world. Oh, way back when in college, 51 years ago, our eternal friendship began with mundane debates, such as who was better, Todd Rundgren or The Who. Then our discussions moved on to more ponderous topics like, is psychology really a science or is it actually a social study? Mark, the psych major, and me, the history major, always had a good time with that. Although I never was devoted to the original Star Trek series like Mark was, I enjoyed watching any number of episodes with him, marveling at his recall of storylines and the quotes of Captain James T. Kirk. And you never experienced the beauty of a breakfast meal until Mark served up his famous version of a Brennan's classic, Eggs Hussard a la Mark. And some of my fondest memories centered on our shared love for the sport of golf. While we played on the public links in New Orleans, the best times we had when we made weekend trips back to his family's homestead in Pensacola, Florida, to play a few rounds at PCC. Mark and his family were always so generous to me. Good times, good times. But amidst all of this college fun, Mark was already giving of himself. As a resident advisor in the dorms, Mark always kept his door open, willing to help others in dealing with the challenges of college life. No wonder he had the respect and admiration of all those he touched. Then life moved on from college. I am sure we all had college friends with whom we swore we would always be in touch. Alas, those contacts diminish over time, but not so with Mark. Mark's eternal friendship always followed me. Although our times together might be separated by a year or two, we simply picked up right where we left off. And during our times together, I sometimes solicited psychological counseling, right? Free advice, the best kind. When I would ask Mark for his thoughts on some family topic, he inevitably responded with the same words every time. It's complicated. Not very helpful, right? And it became a joke between us. But then Mark would pause, give it some thought, and always offer his insights in a compassionate, gentle way. And in 2 instances involving extended family members, he went out of his way to contact them directly and offer his guidance in dealing with some serious family issues. Mark did not simply talk the talk, he walked the walk. For Mark, life was not about acquiring stuff and money or fancy toys. Rather, Mark was all about sharing his very self with others around him. So make no mistake, Mark was rich in kindness and compassion. To Stephanie and Andrew, I simply say, everybody should be so lucky to have someone in life and someone like a friend like Mark, like I had. And to Amy, a heartfelt shout out to you. I thank you for your love of Mark and for taking such great care of my eternal friend. There can be no greater gift. And while we're at it, I want to thank Powers and Annie for bringing Mark into the world and letting me share in his gentleness and compassion. An eternal friendship has no end. And so, Mark, my eternal friend, here we are, 50 years down the road. Because you are my eternal friend, your life, at least for me, is not ended. Rather, it is changed. So today, there's no goodbye from me. I know that in another place and at another time, we shall meet again. Yes, Mark, I understand that our human condition on this planet is complicated. But our eternal friendship is not. For this, I am forever grateful. I am blessed by your eternal friendship, yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And I'll conclude with an excerpt from a poem by the British poet Brian Patton, as he wondered, how long does a man live after all? He wrote, a man lives for as long as we carry him inside us, for as long as we carry the harvest of his dreams, for as long as we ourselves live, holding memories in common, a man lives. Mark, rest easy. Your memory lives on in all of us gathered here today. Light to you, peace to you, love to you, my eternal friend. Godspeed.
I'm already crying, so please bear with me. Every year, on the Jewish holiday of Yom Kippur, I read the same book, The Little Prince. It's one of my favorite books, probably because it was one of my dad's favorites, which is probably because it was one of his dad's favorites. It's full of poetic wisdom and beautiful truths, that what is essential is invisible to the eyes, that life is meaningful because it's ephemeral. But the book begins with a different truth, one that's always resonated with me, that as people grow up, something about how they see the world changes. The world becomes a more practical place, a more reasonable place, a more understandable place, a much duller place. They've lost their sense of wonder. The world, to their eyes, has lost some of its color. When I read The Little Prince, I always think of my dad, because no matter how many years went by, he never really grew up. For him, the world never lost its color. Every sunrise was just as bright as the last. Every rose smelled just as sweet as the last. And every person he met had a story that was just as important as the last. His voice was full of laughter. His heart was full of love. And his eyes were full of wonder. And he filled our lives with love and laughter and wonder too. He found wonder in so many little things. He drew faces on strange mushrooms and took pictures of them and updated me daily on the status of their clearly alien invasions. He downloaded songs he heard on TV shows and played them on repeat. Our favorite was Make Your Own Kind of Music by Mama Cass from Lost. Dad and I liked to play it when it was just us in the car so we could turn up the volume and roll down the windows and sing as loud as we could. It felt like we could fill the world with music. He never met a dog he didn't want to pet, except for poodles, maybe. Dogs are so loyal and playful and full of unconditional love. I think he saw himself in them. He stopped to take pictures of the tiniest flowers and the weirdest insects, little pieces of the world I never would have seen without his eyes. Little reminders that the world is so much more colorful than it appears. 2 summers ago, when my brother and I came home to visit, Dad filled every day with more nature walks than I could count. We usually went to see the sheep at the house down the road, but every walk was different because there were always new flowers and new creatures to take pictures of along the way. The day we left, he tried to give us his phone, full of all the photos he had taken, because they symbolized everything he wanted to give to us. He wanted to give us the world and all the wonder he found in it, all the wonder he had shared with us. No one else I know has seen a world so colorful, so beautiful, so full of wonder as his. You all have met my dad. You know that joy and love and childhood wonder shone out from him like a candle. I think this light came from his unconditional love for everyone and everything around him. He really saw the world around him and the people around him and had an endless capacity to love them both. As his dear friend Steve put it, most of all, I remember his kindness, sense of humor, and everlasting solid morality. He cared deeply, and he did everything he could to make the lives of others better, over and over again. And people noticed, not just Dad's family and Steve Nowicki and everyone here in this room, but everyone Dad ever met. Right now, as the sun sets over Scotland, there are candles in St. Andrews, lit by friends who loved him, who will look out at the sea and up at the stars and think of him. And in those candles and in those stars and in our hearts and theirs, his light still shines. I thought for a long time about what I wanted to say today, about how I could ever express the pride I feel to be my dad's daughter. My dad was the best man I've ever known. How do you put that into words? But ultimately, I realized I don't have to find the words to describe how amazing my dad was, because you all saw him. You knew him. You cared for him, and you loved him. And I cannot possibly express how proud I am that my dad was the person he was, that he really saw you, that he knew you, that he cared for you, and that he loved you. I didn't inherit my dad's beautiful blue eyes, but I hope I inherited his eyes full of wonder. I hope I see the beauty in every beat of a hummingbird's wings, joy in the wet rocks of a mountain stream, and humanity in every person I meet. I hope I remember to listen to them, the hummingbirds, and the mountain stream, and the people, to learn their stories and to love them. I know that in every candle and every starlit night, in every little wonder that this wide world holds, I will see my dad. I hope sometimes that you do too, because I know I'm not the only one who has his eyes. I hope you look through them every now and then and wonder at the beauty of a sunset or the truth of someone's story and think of him.
Return again, return again, return to the land of your soul. Return again, return again, return to the land of your soul. Return to who you are. return again, return again, return to the land of your soul. Return again, return again, return to the land of your soul. Return to who you are. Return to what you are. Return to who you are, born and reborn again. Return again, return again, return to the land of your soul.
Good morning. Amy invited one of Mark's siblings to speak today, so I'm grateful to represent my brothers Powers and Lewis and my sister Ann this morning. I first met Mark in Andalusia, Alabama, at the Covington County Hospital Newborn Nursery, where he had been waiting for me for 30 minutes. Our sister Ann, who I think was 7 at the time, had 2 older brothers, and Ann really wanted a sister. But Ann went home that day with 4 brothers and no sister. Our dad, in his life, liked to tell people, I've got 4 sons and every son has a sister. Oh, 8 children? No, same sister. So from that day in Andalusia, for a long time, Mark and I had a lot of experiences together, a lot of joint ventures. We spent almost every day together doing something. Our dad also liked to tell the story about us when we were little boys in Andalusia, and that my dad had a big voice. He would say, and Mike would find a bug outside, and he would shout, Mark, come pick it up. And so our teamwork together started very early. Methodist ministers move around some, and when we moved to Auburn, Powers and Lewis and Ann were teenagers, and Mark and I were still in elementary school, and we were little elementary school kids. Auburn was kind of a unique place. The university was big, but the town was small. And so it was hard to get in trouble there, although my older brothers got in a little bit there. And also, our parents had 5 children, and Mark and I came along late. And so our parents, as I recall it, had a certain laissez-faire attitude to these last 2. So Mark and I would launch out, to my recollection, in Auburn, and we were in the 3rd or 4th grade just by ourselves, and we would go downtown and we would go into stores and we would browse. We didn't have any money. We'd browse, and then we'd go way over on the other side of the campus to watch football practice. We'd go back to Felton Little Park where we learned to play baseball. We played baseball with Mike Warren's twin brothers, 2 sets of twins on the same Little League team. We'd go over and watch the train go by, and then we'd go to Beasley's pasture where we would have what we called dirt clod battles with our friends. Dirt clods were little pieces of dirt, and when you hit somebody, they wouldn't hurt, they would just bust up. And so we enjoyed doing that until one of our friends went home with a bloody forehead from a rock that we thought was a dirt clod. That was the end of that. In Mobile, we started our first business venture together, and we started with seed money from returning Coke bottles to the grocery store where we would get deposit money. So we built up enough money to ride our bikes up to the drugstore, and we bought 2 boxes of Thin Mints. And we'd take them out into the neighborhood, and we sold them for way more than we paid for them. And so we used that money to go back and buy more boxes of Thin Mints, and we sold that for way more than we paid for it. Then we decided we would go over to the more affluent neighborhood, and we sold them again for way more than we paid for them. But we made the mistake of knocking on the door of Alfred Delchamps, who owned all the Delchamps stores at the time. And so when we got home that afternoon, as Mark and I put it together, Mrs. Delchamps had called our mother, and our mother shut down our thriving business. In Montgomery, we tried an engineering project together. And so this was in the 60s, so there's no Amazon and there's no internet explanation for this, but we said, let's try to make a hot air balloon out of a dry cleaning bag. And so we got some balsa wood, and we got birthday candles, and we put them in the middle, and we got this tall dry cleaner bag. And so we had a lot of failures, but we eventually got it to lift off, and we could get it to go 100 feet in the air, way over to a neighbor's house. And it was just thrilling to see the candles go up. So then Mark discovered these candles that it would come down when the wind blew the candles out. So Mark discovered these candles that would relight when they blew out. And so we would send them off, and they would go miles. They would go completely out of sight. And we were thrilled by it. And this is in Montgomery, Alabama. And we didn't know where they came down, and we didn't want to know where they came down. When we went off to college, I went to Auburn, and Mark went to Tulane. But Tulane started a month before Auburn started. And this was really the first time Mark and I had gone into 2 different directions. And I remember worrying about Mark and how he would do without me in New Orleans. But Mark really thrived at Tulane, and he was, no surprise, he was a big academic success, and he was elected to Phi Beta Kappa, and he really, really did well there. And he also met a group of lifelong friends that have stuck together, and was a really, these were very meaningful relationships for Mark, and we heard from Jeff Quinn today. By the way, Jeff, Mark called me in Auburn one night and said, "Hey, Mike, I just touched Todd Rundgren's hand." After our first year of college, I came back from Auburn with a big bag of dirty clothes, and Mark came back from Tulane with a big bag of dirty clothes and a box of lab rats. And he kept them for the summer. And a couple of weeks later, our parents left town for a week. Again, we were the last of the 5, and so they took off and left Mark and I at home. But then a couple of days later, Mark left for a couple of nights. I can't remember where he went or the circumstances of it, but I was left at home with the rats, who got out of their box. These weren't mice, these were big rats. And they got into our family room, and they got up into the furniture, and you could hear them gnawing around in there, and I'll spare you the details of it. But remember, I was the kid who doesn't like picking little things up, and nothing had changed. And so finally, Mark came home, and he quickly gathered them all up. But I was really disturbed by the whole event, and he counseled me for several days. And I think I was Mark's first clinical therapy patient. In his life, Mark took what he acquired from his parents, Powers and Annie, together with his exceptional education and his experiences and the love of his family, to become the wise, kind, principled, and gentle man that he was. Mark was a listener rather than someone who wanted to dominate the conversation. Mark really didn't care about material things, and he didn't care about fashion. But he cared about you. And it's no surprise that he made an impactful career out of listening and helping. And that's what he did for thousands of children and young people in his career. So there's no denying that today is the closing of a curtain. But Mark is whole again. And what he meant to us, his care for others, his wise counsel, humor and demeanor, his stories and experiences, and his love for Amy and Stephanie and Andrew and for all of us will always be with us. Thank you.
My Uncle Mark was a kind and brilliant man, passionate, patient, and loving. When I was 5 years old, my family and I were visiting the McLeods in Pensacola Beach, and I met Amy Gotch for the first time. And in the ocean, my 5-year-old self pulled Uncle Mark to the side and said, "Hey, Uncle Mark, I really like Amy. I think you should ask her to marry you because I want her to be my aunt." Amy and Mark always took their time. I mean, really. They always took their time. They did things their way and in their time because they were partners. So I don't think it was me that tipped the scales that time, but a few years later, after my plea, my dream came true, and there was a wedding. On the back of your bulletin today is what I didn't need a photograph to remember. It is Amy in this beautiful hat. What I also remember was the night before at their rehearsal dinner, because we younger kids were allowed to sit at the bar and order as many real cherry Cokes as we wanted. And I'm not sure my siblings or my cousins or I slept much that caffeine-charged night. As a child growing up, Mark and Amy were a part of my Thanksgivings and my Christmases. I can see Uncle Mark warming up dessert in the microwave and eating enormous bites of Rocky Road or of pound cake covered in homemade custard. I can see him playing touch football games in my parents' front yard. And I remember him being the only one willing to immediately jump with me on our new trampoline when we had stomachs full of Christmas morning cinnamon sticks. Another Christmas, Mark and Amy helped my sister and me sneak my parents' stockings up into our bathroom so we could surprise them with tiny gifts we'd gotten from Kmart. At the time, my sister was known in our family as Little Amy. And Amy Gotch, well, she was Big Amy. My Uncle Mark and my Aunt Amy always made me feel special, important, even as a kid. They acted like listening to me was a pleasure for them, like loving me was an honor for them. So I thrived in basking in their love. And that is really how my Uncle Mark lived his life, listening to people, learning about people, and making people like me, and I suspect like you, feel special and heard. I love my Uncle Mark's smile because it extended beyond his mouth and up into his eyes, which would absolutely sparkle. His chuckle at a good joke was joyful to experience because you didn't just hear it, you saw it. This same sparkle could be seen when he looked at someone he loved. He cared deeply for his people. And I always was and always will be thankful to be one of Uncle Mark's people. Nearly a decade ago, I was in a terrible car wreck, and Uncle Mark, along with my other McLeod uncles, called me frequently during that long recovery process. I can see where I was sitting in my house at the time, and Uncle Mark was so patient, such a good listener, such a good sharer. Mark could embrace you with a huge McLeod hug and a kiss on the lips like the best of them. The fact that Big Amy can do the same is maybe what swayed and drew them to one another. The last time I saw Uncle Mark, he wanted to tell me about his love for bluebirds. Because you see, they reminded him of his mother, my nanny, and of a good friend of Mark's. And from that day on, if I am outside, I strain my eyes to see bluebirds because they make me think of my Uncle Mark. So I invite you to look for the bluebirds. Mark would want us to celebrate being together and to share real and authentic life together, not just today, but every day. We were and we are loved by Mark McLeod. We loved and we do love Mark McLeod. And we are a blessed people for this very reason. Because, my friends and my family, to love another person is to see the face of God. Thanks be to God for Mark McLeod. Let us pray. Eternal God, we praise you for the great company of all those who have finished their course in faith and now rest from their labor. We praise you for those dear to us, whom we name in our hearts before you now. Especially, we praise you for Mark, whom you have graciously received into your presence. To all of these, grant your peace. Let perpetual light shine upon them, and help us so to believe where we have not seen, that your presence may lead us through our years and bring us at last with them into the joy of your home, not made with hands, but with your eternal ways, O God. Amen.
Please stand. A reading from the Gospel of John. Jesus said, "Do not let your heart be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house there are many dwelling places. If it were not so, would I have told you that I go to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and will take you to myself. So where I am, there you may also be. And you know the way to the place where I am going. I will not leave you orphaned. I am coming to you. In a little while the world will no longer see me, but you will see me. Because I live, you will also live. I have said these things to you while I am still with you. But the Advocate, the Holy Spirit, whom the Father will send in my name, will teach you everything and remind you of all I have said to you. Peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you. I do not give you as the world gives. Do not let your heart be troubled, and do not let them be afraid. Be seated.
It really is an honor to be together this day as we celebrate the life of Mark McLeod. There's really not much I can say that hasn't been said, but Mark and Mike and Powers and Louis and Ann grew up in many dwelling places, from Andalusia to Auburn to Mobile to Montgomery. Powers and Annie itinerated. That is a United Methodist word. United Methodists know what that means, and especially if you're clergy. It means they went from place to place, serving churches in Alabama. It is a kind of nomadic life, being the child of a Methodist minister. Living in parsonages is an interesting and, I can imagine, could be an unsettling way to grow up. You move from place to place, not because you want to necessarily, but because your parents and the bishop want you to. You are the children of parents who are committed to justice and dignity and hope for all in a time where there was injustice and violence and abuse and hopelessness. And somehow those values took over Mark's and yours and our lives. Powers and Annie turned many a dwelling place into a home. I never knew them, but I know that because I knew Mark and I know you. I am sure that there were plenty of fights and games and laughter and food and joy and family. Mark went on to Tulane making friends, and I know having a robust social life because he told me, as well as a distinguished intellectual life. I am sure being profoundly himself, authentic, honest, gentle, loving his friends, he then moved to Emory and to Atlanta. And in some ways, Mark would never move again. He found his home, he found his love. Amy and their loves, Stephanie and Andrew. He found a place and a home and a world, always making it better for those who were suffering and broken and wounded and lonely and helpless. Mark understood the pain of the world, but his own center and core would incorporate a fuller understanding of the world where joy and laughter and love and compassion abound. Mark found colleagues and friends who together walked the path of healing the world. I heard many a story about Mark and Amy's Friday night interfaith friendships, which were deep. He loved his colleagues. He loved his golfing friends and his movie nights with Stephanie and Amy and Andrew. And I so coveted and admired the way he talked about how they planned for their family vacations. Every year I would say, Mark, what's the plan for the vacation? Mark and I stuck together in university life and in death within the beloved community of Emory. Too many nights brought us together in a fraternity house where a brother had died, or in my office where parents with a precious daughter had passed. Mark and I were kind of a team in life, but more in death. And there were lots of memorial services for those who were gone too young. But Mark's deep aspiration and yearning for health and healing and hospitality were at the core of his very being. His love of Amy and Stephanie and Andrew, his beloved brothers and Anne, his friends and colleagues, and his unassuming great compassion helped to bring healing to a broken world. As we just listened to the Gospel of John, we hear the words of truth and comfort. In God's universe, there are many dwelling places. There are houses in Andalusia and Montgomery and Tulane and Emory. There are spaces of joy in Seattle and in St. Andrews. There are hospital rooms and nursing facilities. There are hikes in the woods and bird watching. There are some pubs, hanging out with friends. There are golf courses, and there are dining rooms. And there was a journey to Jordan and Israel and Palestine, and many dwellings along the road to New York and all their travels. After an afternoon of a drink with Mark, often as we debriefed what had happened, Mark and I might have a drink, and then he would say, "Will you take me home?" I know that in the family there is a song, "Sing Your Way Home." So from John, the gospel writer, draws this beautiful archetype of the meaning of death and departing. And Jesus said to those he loved and the ones he left behind, in God's universe, in God's dwellings, there are many, many places. Some we have inhabited, like homes and universities and hospitals and lakes and streams and skies and golf courses. And some we have not. Only Mark now inhabits those. If it were not so, would I have told you that I go to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and take you to myself, so that where I am, you may be also. I will not leave you orphaned. I am coming to you. In a little while, the world will no longer see me, but will see me, and I live in the stars and in your hearts and in the mysteries of life and on golf courses and on walks. You will live also. Peace I leave you, peace I give to you. I do not give it as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled. Do not let them be afraid. Dear friends, hold these words close and sing your way home.
Go from this place. You're invited to remain seated for a little bit of the closing music. And then you're invited to gather with the family in the fellowship hall. Receive now this blessing. God of us all, your love never ends. When all else fails, you are still God. We pray to you for one another in our need and for all anywhere who mourn with us this day. To those who doubt, give light. To those who are weak, strength. To all who have sinned, mercy. And to all who sorrow, peace. Keep true in us the love which we hold with one another, and in all our ways we trust you, O Eternal One. And now, may the God of peace who brought us back to life keep you and hold you. May the Lord